So moved.
Okay, thank you. And doesn't look like there's anyone from the public here, is there, in fact, that I'm overlooking? If not, we'll move right into the subcommittee reports and Coral.
Actually, before we jump into our review, I just wanted to touch base with Luke and Ryan and just see if we can close the loop with Reggie on changes, if there's any changes to that brand manual. I just had mentioned to him per his email that I would bring it up today. And I know he's anxious to just kind of make sure we're wrapped up, and he doesn't want to have any loose ends out there.
So Ryan's not on right now. He's in a meeting or in a training session. That's why. So I've got the login. So I'm going to follow back up with him on that question.
That would be great. Yeah, and can I leave it, Luke, in your hands to close the loop with Reggie?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, well, I just wanted to go through a couple of quick things. We had an opportunity to meet with Luke and talk about some events that are coming up in the next few months. And we do have some exciting things to talk about and engage the community on. Of course, one of them being the ribbon cutting ceremony at the Silverline Park. So what we did with Luke is we kind of went through some potential estimated timeframes on some things that we'll do from a promotional standpoint. We talked about hopefully being able to host the ribbon cutting ceremony at Silverline by early April. So what we've been doing internally is working back from that tentative timeframe and figuring out press release, when we might need to put some social media posts together, potentially a blog, etc. So that is in the works. One of the things that I want us to talk about, and we can table maybe until the end of the meeting when Luke goes through scheduling, but getting an idea of how close we are to setting an actual date, because obviously we want to make sure that it's a date that works for many of us, as well as the Youngs, key members of, the town of Woodfin. So the administrative department, it would be good to try to lock in a date sooner than later. And I know that there's a lot of variables there, but it would also be nice to have a date that we can plan something that entices local media to attend and help us celebrate the accomplishments thus far here in Woodfin. So that is very much front and center on our scheduling. Also, we reached out to David over at Equinox, and we will have by early April, late March, early April, a need to engage the community on the 60% design on the Riverside Park. So that will be working with them on potentially a press release, disseminating that information, and getting, similarly to what we did when we were at the first round, like getting a survey out and moving forward with that. So that's going to be really important. Other than that, it's more or less been just making sure that our team is on top of what needs to happen. Lastly, I spoke with Ryan a week and a half ago, and he has been very accommodating. He's more than happy to handle all the internal PR needs. So he said, you just let me know thoughts on social media posts. I'll get it up there. I'll write the initial press release. We had mentioned to him that we'll gladly review and edit any of the releases and assist with the dissemination of the releases. So he continued to say that although he's not been asked, he suspects that the planning of the ribbon cutting ceremony will fall on his plate, and he's happy to take care of that. So it sounds as though we will be working quite closely with him moving forward. And then we also mentioned to him that we'd be happy to assist with a press release announcing new town administrator. And he said that that will be revealed as of next week. So that could be a piece of big news coming from Woodfin that'll happen this month. So that's what I have to report on behalf of our committee. Any questions?
The manual that you referenced, has that been uploaded to the Teams? Reggie's work or the work that you all have done with him?
I have not. I think what Reggie's trying to figure out if it's the final approved version. So that's what we need to wrap up.
Any other questions or comments?
One question, since
Mhm.
Ryan's not on, would anyone like to volunteer to take notes? Otherwise, he said he would do it later, but would have to watch this again. For minutes, I should ask.
I can try. I've been scribbling so far, so I can do it.
Thank you, Ann.
Sure.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Ann. I'll take notes as well if you
Yeah,
get
I'll share
concerned
the
you have
document.
gaps.
We can kind of trade off.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian, you're up.
Nope. Good afternoon, everybody. The project management subcommittee met on January 19th. Myself and Gerald and Luke were present. We had we kicked it off with a budget discussion. Luke shared the projected costs at the 30% design phase compared to the original budget, which was during the master planning phase. There's a projected increase of about 2.8 million, narrowed down to about 5 or 6, primary reasons, including site complications, added scope, increased design and admin costs, inflation, COVID material cost increase, and contingency. We suggested that Luke and the town anticipate questions from this group as well as the commissioners and prepare the response and a proposed solution for each. The questions such as, do you anticipate additional cost increases? Are there value engineer opportunities or phasing opportunities? How can the differences be made up or paid for? Is there a solid fundraising strategy in place, and what's that plan? Can it include additional funding to close the variance gap? And then in the near future, to exhibit that the updated cost of variance visual, the rationale and a proposed plan to this team as well as town staff for review and input, further input before presenting to the commissioners. We also discussed operational planning for Silverline Park. Within the next week, I'll send the proposed questions to you all, as well as the proposed stakeholders, the proposed vendors and community members that we want to send this survey to. And I'd like to get your feedback with filling in the gaps from a question standpoint, as well as folks that we want to make sure receive the questions regarding how the best use for the park opening on May 1st and how they would like to use the park. As far as the follow-up from Luke, and then we also talked about the follow-up from Luke and Walt's question regarding the portable trailer versus permanent restroom, and since then there's been more conversations between the PGAC, which I feel like you are all already in the loop with on there, but ultimately what we talked about, ideally that the project is, that portion of the project is eventually built with the master plan in mind. From our perspective, it's part of the overall master plan from a visual standpoint, but haven't seen any further design or cost information until recently, which is why we requested that. And then And then, yeah, that pretty much summarizes everything. Let me know if you have any questions. That's all I have.
I think Walt is indisposed.
Okay, Walt is on the phone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was Jerry with some information that I requested earlier. So it was a call I felt like I had to take.
That's an important call. Good move.
I had a question about the cost estimates. I understood that we were going to see those a little sooner, and I realized that you all have seen them. Several of the things, at least the status of the boat ramp and the extra pavilion that we had suggested be added, were, I thought, contingent on the cost, and that we were going to have an opportunity to weigh in on that before it got all the way to the 60% point. And it looks like we're moving towards that 60% presentation without us having a whole lot of time to, review and input and, make decisions. Luke, could you?
So you could always take it out easier than adding it in. And we didn't know the cost until we completed that, till we got the cost. So I've not looked at it with the intent of the boat ramp. But that's why we've got this meeting set up with the Board of Commissioners subcommittee. I think we've included the PM. I think you're included.
Right.
A couple weeks from now to really dig into the numbers. Extra pavilion, then we can get into the specifics, because the extra pavilion's not that much additional, could be less than 100K. The boat ramp potentially could be a value engineer, but what we're seeing is any of the amenities that were added, which were very few, even if you cut all those out, there's no way you could get back to original budget. So there was just substantial cost increases. Half of it really could be explained by escalation, and the other, and so that's where we'll get into those numbers. And then I've got to start to build that budget bridge of how and explain why, way I see it. And then, as well as it's a twofold meeting that we want to discuss, is not just the estimates and how much it's going to cost to build this, but it's also the funding opportunities. So we can, I think it's not an insurmountable hurdle.
Oh, that's fine. I just, by looking at the invitee list for that meeting, I got the impression that it was all going to be about fundraising and not so much digging into the nuts and bolts of the various parts.
And it may very well go into that, because that is a very important part now that we have the estimate. But my intent is to also discuss cost estimates as well on that.
Okay, well, I mentioned it because I just don't want us to be, get into a spot where we don't have very much time to provide input on something that we were asked to comment on, and that we said that we would comment on.
Sure.
After we saw the estimates. Okay.
Luke, would now or between now and that meeting be a better time to hear feedback and preparation instead of waiting?
I guess
Walt, are you asking about the 500,000 added scope out of the 2.8 total?
No, I'm just asking in general, and certainly if I'm asking in terms of time, or when we receive, whatever cost estimates we're going to have, are we going to in fact have time to, review them and comment and, allow for a little bit of back and forth, given that we meet effectively once a month. And for that upcoming, funding meeting, if we're going to talk about the cost estimates, I would certainly like to go into that with an opportunity to review those in advance if they're in hand.
I think one of the reasons I haven't shared them on this was because of the public nature of it, because I'm still getting some guidance from Eric and where, what, when, and how to share stuff. So that's why I haven't just broadcast it. I will eventually, but I'd like to do it in a way that makes sense. I don't think there's opportunities to cut this park down, because I haven't worked with you long, Walt, but I know in my previous life, when you see this and you see a budget escalation, it's like, okay, what can we cut to get this back under budget? And that's the approach I went into it, and you just can't get there. There's some things I'm still getting some more clarity on, like, 60% of that ad was a new ramp. Well, we're not getting, 300 grand of that ramp. It's not 300 grand of, if you compare it, I'm not explaining this well. The cost estimate, the cost increases to build that ramp from 2017 to now increased. So we may only be getting $100,000 worth of ramp added scope, but it really costs 300 grand, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to break it out into, if we had this a part of 2017 or the original estimate to now, because what it's basically, it's going to shift majority of the cost into the escalation column. And that's just normal with, as you go and progress through time with time on projects.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, I'm not interested in revisiting what 2017 was. What we have is current cost estimates, and my first instinct is not necessarily to cut, but to balance expenses and income. So it's got to be one or the other. So now I'm buying materials and seeing costs go up every week. So that's no surprise. As I said, for me, it's just a matter of having information in a timely manner so that we can do the things that we're arguably supposed to do. And I think you're absolutely spot on about the public nature of a meeting and what can be shared. Something I hadn't given much thought to, but
part of that is I'm new to the fundraising, but hearing them, let me summarize it this way. I feel like I'm going to the boss with a problem and I don't yet have the solution. And I like to go to the boss with the problem and the solution. So that's what I think this meeting in next week or so will help clarify our position and path forward.
Okay, fair enough. I consider our committee to be both the problem and the solution.
Okay.
We're supposed to foresee the problem and come up with a solution. Okay. So ready to move on? Talk about the set of the Silver Line building. Before opening up the general discussion, I just wanted to say that the reason that I sent out the email about imagine if the building weren't there, what would we build, is because for any of us, probably for all of us, when we see a graphic or a picture or whatever, we're drawn to solutions around what we can see. And I certainly do it. I was just trying to encourage us to think in terms of what would we do if that weren't there? And that went out before seeing these cost estimates, which frankly got my attention. So Luke, how about you take us through the estimates and the options and
let me
open for questions.
In talking with a few of you and different folks, I realized there's probably some semantics, and that's why I threw these options up here just to go through and define. Demo meant two different things, and that was a little confusing. So when we look at, I want to put in the disclaimer, these are at best 50% estimates. These are swags. So option A, it's a non-flood-proof restroom at grade, and I'm going to call it a pole barn demo and reconstruct. And what I mean by that is like that image that we had where we leave the building, take out the walls, and just open it up. And for reference, I'm calling that a pole barn and reconstruct. So that's where you get that price. Option B is to build a flood-proof restroom at grade. It's the same thing, but build the restroom flood-proof. Option C was what the imagery we saw and I sent out, was that elevated platform with a ramp and a bathroom, and potentially opening up tenant space upstairs. Option D would be just leveling the building and building a new small 6,000 square foot elevated building with bathrooms. I don't think the 6,000 square foot would include additional space. That would just be, well, no, wait, it would include some amount of space. I thought that option was too far out there, so we didn't really develop that with pictures or anything. So then we started going along. Option E, full demo and build flood-proof restrooms at grade. You've got around $500,000. And then I wanted to throw out there what it would cost to full demo of the building, just take it down to the concrete. You're approximately 150K. So then we started thinking about this, and I'm going to get with Eric and he's got some contacts. There's a restaurant owner that we're going to meet with. There's also an outfitter that we're going to meet with and get their thoughts and opinions of how and what they could use that space for. That way we're not trying to guess. And who knows if with meeting with a commercial individual, if dollars come with that. So that can open up a realm of possibilities there. So really I think that's from their side, getting what they would define that use to be. We talked about sports, kind of, I don't think it's really a great space for that just because of the minimum standards. And talking with Eric and Sherry and some of the folks on staff, that if I were to call, what we're trying to do is define the ideal scenario. And I would say that's a bathroom, a large covered space, and potentially adding parking. There's a lot of other amenities we could add, but that's really the ideal scenario. So then floodplain issues. This building, I mean, the entire site, probably right along the railroad, is all within the floodplain. So it really limits what we can do. We tried again and successfully got a meeting set up next week with the floodplain administrator. So there's some success. It's probably been months since we've been able to get that happen. So I'm really happy for that. He actually provided some additional information, which I thought was good. So you heard the 150K cap that we've had, which is about the valuation limit of 300, cut in half, it's 150. We had a roof installed. Well, all that being said, that's in the past. That clock resets here in March. So we had that hit, and the tax value of the building was raised to 424. So that means we have over $200,000, as long as we don't pull a permit prior to that date, that clock will reset. So that gives us a little more wiggle room of what to do. So we're going to meet with him. I've got some ideas. One of the things, I don't know if you guys have seen these, let me pull up. I just threw some pictures on a PowerPoint. Someone introduced the Portland Loo to me, and it was like an aha moment in that if we could break apart the bathroom from that building, we can figure out what to do with the building later, because the park needs a bathroom. And if we can install one of these out by that lean-to shelter, that I guess the Porta-John blind, if I've got it over here too, it's right in this area. It's right adjacent to the, I don't know if you could see my cursor, right adjacent to the pirate ship. I mean, if you could put a small little bathroom right there, and then that would allow us to disconnect the bathroom and substantial cost away from that building. That doesn't mean we can't put another bathroom over there. It just means the time and the rush to do it isn't there. So there, I think we'll have more of an update after we talk with the floodplain administrator and what we can do on that aspect. Building a bathroom within a floodplain is, it's not a permitted item, but I think one of our workaround, one of the ways we potentially could do it is we could work within that building footprint. So it may limit us to doing a standalone bathroom versus within the footprint. So there's some options that we have to look at there. I think there's a path forward. Hopefully next week we'll have some more clarity on that. Trying to think if there's something else. I'll stop there. Are there any questions with some of that information? So I kind of went over a lot.
As far as option A is concerned, I wasn't under the impression, I was under the impression that a non-flood-proof restroom was not an option.
I don't think it is either.
I walked through the building and I didn't see anything that could be turned into a restroom as it was. So that means that as soon as you touch the plumbing or anything else, then it's all got to be brought to code. And something that was said last month led me to believe that non-flood proof you just couldn't do it. And I can understand why. But that takes option A completely off the board, if in fact that's the truth.
Yeah, and there's some nuances there that you may not want to do that anyway. I mean, I just don't like the idea of putting a bathroom in where it can get flooded.
I agree. The reason that Jerry called me back was because I'd asked him a couple of weeks ago to get some information from the floodplain administrator. And he said that, and I kind of cut him off, so he might have had a little bit more information. But my initial question was, where is the floodplain? How high is it? And it turns out that the last time that the floodplain was updated for Woodfin was in 2010. And although apparently on the plans it says 2020, that's not the case. But if you assume that it is right about the level of the railroad tracks, then according to my sort of rough level, that puts it at about 7.5 feet above grade for the existing building, which means that as soon as whatever is done at a sort of standard height, then that would be 8-foot ceilings, minimum inside would get us above it, then the floor, and then anything that was done above that.
Correct. And if you recall in the sketches we sent over where it had the profile view, it kind of showed that to where that's why one of the options C is feasible in the floodplain, because you could make it flood proof below that, which is make it a pole barn. And then above that, as long as you're 2 foot or 2 to 3 feet above the base flood elevation, you can build a structure that's doesn't have to be flood proof. And that's why that option was there.
As I expressed in the email that I sent out, I don't see any reason to have a building that large. And so I'm in favor of, much smaller structure. But several people commented that, oh, we don't want to give up that big building. And I wonder if there is a way to, for whatever is done, put in the columns that a building could be built on, and thereby preserve the option to build later if we should do something smaller now. And the example that I have of that is that structure that's over on Merriman next to where Westall Chandler used to be, where the guy started a little house with some spiral stairs. I'm sure you've all seen it, metal frame. And I think that he did that in order to get above the floodplain. And of course, he hadn't touched it for, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. But apparently still has the option of doing that. So, comments? Oh, let me add one other thing. I asked Jerry and if he would poll the board and see what's their threshold for how much of a limit it could be. And I think with the anticipated overages, additional expenses on Riverside, that makes it even, more an issue. There's not really much point in us pursuing any option that is 2 or 3 times what the board says that they're prepared to fund. So there's no, that conversation hasn't happened yet, from the board level. But it seemed like it was prudent to me that we should look at it from both perspectives. How much they were prepared to spend versus the options that were presented.
I have a question, Luke. This is Lucy.
Yeah.
That Portland Loo that you're talking about, so would that be risen above floodplain level?
No.
I didn't hear the question.
The Portland Loo would that be installed elevated above floodplain level?
No.
How does that work?
That's what we have to figure out.
Oh, okay.
I think there's opportunity. One of the ways is you can manage this by having a flood management plan. And short end of it, or like a Cliff Notes version, would be flood stage reaches X. We send the maintenance crew out there to shut a valve. Done. And there's ways to mitigate it without like automation.
I see. And look, I have to apologize because I've been too busy with my own life to really dive deep into this, and I have not been to that building yet. But are you saying that the existing building does not have plumbing in it at all?
No, it does. There's utilities, there's water, sewer there. So depending on which option we would need to, you'd have to upgrade the water meter, probably do a different sewer tap, and increase the electrical service panel, but there are utilities there.
Okay.
Yeah, the service panel is torn out, but there's a whole series of bathrooms all along the outside walls. The issue in my mind is, where does the primary sewer tap come in? Because that would have a bearing on the cost of upfitting another bathroom.
Right.
As far as immediate needs for the park, the plan is for porta potties, right? Isn't that
Correct?
so? I think that, and one of the part of your ideal scenario is additional parking. With the porta potties, if we run them for a season, looks like we're going to have our hands full with other things anyway, then we would have both a better feel for, how much parking was needed, and, the amount of just general traffic through the park, which would inform needs for, bathroom, the size of the bathrooms, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Walt,
Okay.
did you get an answer from Jerry about what their appetite is for improvements?
No, they haven't had that meeting yet. I thought that, I misunderstood. I thought that it was going to be yesterday. And in fact, I believe they're meeting or have met today, but about the replacement commissioner. And so I don't know that it'll come up. He said that he could put it on the agenda for next week's meeting. I suggested that, this could almost be an email poll or a casual conversation. I didn't expect it to be a long discussion about, and we weren't asking for a final dollar. I just wanted, a best guess of how much, they thought they would be prepared to allocate for the construction or reconstruction. So we should have something, by certainly before the next meeting, our next meeting.
I ask a couple of questions as well. Is this an expense that the town anticipated?
Good question.
Because I just get worried. I know we've got to wrap up Silverline, but as the project gets a bit more drawn out, the Greenway project, I just get worried about the community's perception of where the spend is. So that's one concern of mine as we allocate a lot of resources right now to Silverline. My other question too is the Silverline family. Do they have any say in this aspect? I understand this is a Woodfin building, but the end result, since they gifted the land, should we incorporate them, or have we incorporated them into any of the conversations?
I'm under the impression that the town bought that building separate from the gift of the Silverline family. That was a separate parcel. I could be mistaken about that.
That building was bought like well over a decade ago.
Thank you.
Well, since I did this, I was debating whether to throw this up here, but you go on Google and I just want to try to get a visual of how much space that building takes up. And if we cut that building in half, that would be an enormous pavilion. So the space is just, it doesn't fit the park. When you look at this view, it again doesn't feel like it fits the park. When I went out there again too, thinking maintenance long term, this portion of the building is like underwater, like it abuts that wetland. So there's certain things that you wouldn't want to build a building right there. That being said, my goal is to get all the different options. So what Eric reminded me some of the history that the town Board of Commissioners voted to keep the building. And now we need to go back to them and present options of here's what we've found that we can do, and then get guidance from them.
I wasn't aware that the commissioners had voted to keep the building per se.
It was
They were explicit. They were explicit about that. So we did a feasibility study. We asked PFA architects to do a feasibility study probably a year and a half ago, 15 months ago. And one of the options was tear the building down, build restrooms back up. So elevated restrooms, from that all the way to fully flood-proof the building. And then no cost estimates, because it was very, very just like feasibility. What could you do? It's also because it's subject to the floodplain, it's subject to that floodplain administrator's final say. And that's evolving, we're learning. Not to discredit him in any way, but it's evolving. They were very explicit, and the decision point was, do we put a roof on the building or not? Because it was leaking on the tenant. And the tenant had been complaining for years on that. And so the decision was, let's keep, the building will stay. We will use it in some way, put a roof on it. There is no budget for it. There had never been a budget for it. That's a challenge. So now we're at the point where we at least have some options, but the options still range with the new board from tear it down and have no bathrooms, not ideal, but that's an option for them to decide, or for this committee to recommend, make a recommendation on, all the way up to engaging. We've had people contact the town, and so that's where Luke was saying we're going to speak with the restaurant group who's interested, and they say they have a lot of resources to bring to this project. Now, the decision point for the board and this committee would be, do we want a commercial enterprise in the middle of a park? That's not for staff to decide, or contractors in my case. It's our job to bring back options, retain as much flexibility as possible along the way. And this is where we are. We've got a little more clarity on what we can do now, and some costs to go along with it. So it's all part of the process. And so any recommendations this committee would make would be welcome. And I think, Coral, you have hit on something that I think I've been concerned about a little bit too, is we can't put all of our eggs in one basket, because we have other things we've got to consider as well. So there are a lot of moving parts still, and we're trying to wrangle those. And Luke is doing a good job this is one of the most complex municipal projects I've ever seen in my career. So there aren't simple answers to the questions. Do we want bathrooms there? I think that would be something that the board, this committee would benefit the town board to think through. Do we want bathrooms on this site? What is most important? Because you all are channeling the voice of the community, the positions of the community. So that would be really helpful.
Revisiting, of course, you weren't at the last meeting, but some of these things we did discuss, particularly given that there was the upstairs space that could be rented out. And if I recall correctly, our consensus was that we wanted to preserve all of the utilities on site. We didn't want to tear the building down, which would cause us to lose all of those. We wanted to be able to provide hookups for a food truck, and that we were really unenthusiastic about the idea of having a commercial enterprise in the park with the attendant problems, parking, and and everything else that could bring.
Since you discussed that, you don't need to spend any time to bring me up to speed. I appreciate that, Walt, very much. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay, Eric, do you want to bring us up to speed on the bond?
Luke, if you can, there it is. Good, thank you. So there's some unfounded concern about the bonds and around the bonds. This is what we know, and it's good news on several fronts. One is that the bonds were approved in 2016. We know that. The clock starts ticking 7 years before that authorization by the voters expires. And it's not to use the funds, it's to sell the bonds. So you still keep those bonds, those proceeds, you just have to sell the bonds. And so what we've done is we've sold, of the $4.5 million, we sold $3 million of that. There's $1.5 million remaining to be sold. So before I left, I know Sherry has continued to talk with the financial advisors about selling the remaining 1.5, and when's the appropriate time to do that. So we know that we have a year and a half, almost 2 years, a little more than a year and a half now to do that. Under the initial authorization, the State Treasurer's Office and the Local Government Commission division of the Treasurer's Office entertains requests to have a 3-year extension, and those are pretty much just rubber stamped, especially with a good case like we've got. We're spending the money, and we have actual design plans in hand, and et cetera. So there's little risk of that going away. What I will tell you is general obligations bonds is not the only financing vehicle that's available to the town anyway. So there are other opportunities to borrow money, even up to that $1.5 million to fulfill that obligation to the community is not a problem. So just to allay any concerns around battery anxieties, we worked on this little timeline here. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. I think the question came about because nobody knew.
Indeed. Understood.
Okay. Any more thoughts or questions before we move on to the old business? Okay, the issue about a historian came up in a conversation between Eric and I, and several months ago, maybe November, late October, November. And the idea was to, and I won't speak for Eric, I'll let him speak for himself, but my understanding of what was entailed would be something that would, as people moved through the parks, would tie them, to the history of the place. So it wouldn't, sort of add to the, intellectual amenities to the park. But there wasn't anybody that could do that. I mean, there was nobody on our committee. There was nobody that would pull that information together. I have found somebody that would do that. And that being sort of undefined. She is a volunteer with Rocky Hollowfield on the Craggy Mountain line. When we were on the train ride, she introduced herself as a historian. She has a degree in history. She's worked, in that field, although she's doing something else now. The last that Eric and I discussed it at all, it was sort of, we've got a lot of other things on our plate right now. Who is really the one to, how much does it cost? What do we want? And I think that my sense of it was that I should get back to her and say, our plate's full right now. Presumably, this is not something, and here by presumably, I'm thinking in terms of some signs on a pole or a pedestal of some kind that would be informative. So I don't see something that is either real expensive or requires a great deal of lead time. So it's something that's easily postponed. But also it could be the recommendation that we should make if in fact we want to pursue something like that. So as it stands right now, particularly given the other things, I'm happy to let it slide unless you all feel like that it's something that we should pursue. As I say, I view it as a relatively low cost, relatively short-term turnaround. Any thoughts? Bless you.
I think it's a great idea. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Kennedy, I'm sorry. Well, this is Lucy. I would agree with you, Walt, but I would defer to the other subcommittees to see if they have the time and capacity to focus on it.
I personally think it's a great idea. I think it builds a sense of community, which I think the town has really tried for the last 15 years to do. So, but then again, I think it should go to a separate committee and be talked about, as long as it's not that expensive.
Well, my take on it was that the town commissioned this 50-year history brochure. And as I read through it, it seemed to me, and I haven't looked at it for months, it seemed to me that it focused on people and that there's a lot of things that are of interest. The old prison, the connection with the river, the Craggy Mountain line and the association with the trolleys. There's a lot of things that are effectively part of the history of Woodfin going back even well before Woodfin was a town. And so my thought would be to focus on, effectively physical aspects, so that as people were walking along, they would have, something to read. And
Oh,
yes,
this is Gerald.
Yeah.
Am I understanding correctly, when you say signs, they're similar to interpretive signs that could be put up, say, at their own prison to present the history of that building or the rail line or other historical aspects along the Blue Wayne Greenway?
that's kind of how I took that. Yeah, I mean, that was,
Mm.
it's all open to your all, to anybody's suggestion.
I think that's a great idea. And one thing that it does do is expand the timeline. There's no hurry for that because those could go up even after there's additional items after the construction of the Greenways funds become available. And as we learn the history of different spots along the Blue Wayne Greenway.
Okay, well, if there's a sense that this is something that we would like to pursue, the way, the sort of the next step would be for possibly Eric and I to meet with this woman if he's available and she's available, if we can find a mutual time, and just kind of talk about it and see, come back to you all with a little bit more of a little more refined concept.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds
This
great.
is, placemaking is extremely important, and these are going to be very important parks to Woodfin. And you're all right that it is something that could happen after the infrastructure is put in. But maybe a different committee, a subcommittee could be formed to work on that. Once you have the idea of how much it would cost and what her approach would be.
Okay, how about, I'll try to set up a meeting with her so that by our next meeting, we have a little bit more information. And that will, we'll sort of move incrementally on. Okay, we talked about last meeting, we talked about moving one of the little free libraries. Luke, you said that was, you would take care of that somehow. And I just wondered if anything had been done on it. We were going to move it to Silver Line, take the one that's out at the far end of Riverside Park. Have the guys just pull the pole and plant it down at Silver Line someplace.
Yeah, I have not done that yet, but I'll check back with Johnny and see if that's something that they have time to do.
Okay, we raised the issue about alcohol in the parks, and Ryan checked on it, had an answer for me the next day. Town already has an ordinance that covers the use of alcohol when and how it can be used. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a resolved issue. And we also suggested that the board do something to about the skateboard ramps. Easily understand that nothing's been done about that, but it's on the list. Were you going to forward that to the board, Luke?
Eventually,
Okay.
I guess I look at that and I go, I've got a year and a half on that one.
Yeah, totally.
So we'll eventually find a good home for them.
Okay. So let's move into the project updates.
Sure. Silverline Park. I'm going to flip back and forth here. So we've talked a little bit about it so a couple of things that have happened, and Coral, when you were talking, I feel like the branding update is going to be until it's used, or no, that's the time we're going to look at it. So, hey, here's a great example. So this is not final. This is just first draft, and Equinox is taking point on that. But I also wanted to throw it out there for you guys to look at. They didn't use the right font. The logo is too small. So those are the things that stick out. But you look at the sign below, that looks pretty good. So that's an example. We're looking at placement of the sign. The other aspect that we're moving forward on, I think we discussed it, was the naming of the pirate ship to SS Jason Young. It'll also be that sandblasted HDU board, and there's the placement of where it's going to be. It's going to be black with that white lettering, and that's going to look really good. It's going to make that white pop on the on that like dark blue material. So there's a couple, it's really small stuff, minor issues. They had to tie, you know, if you're out there, they had to tie in the gutters on the train station to some under drains. So that's why they removed some of the boards. The pirate ship is continuing. That's one of the last major things before we can get the final paving done. I gotta, just before this, got to update. It's the first time I saw a delivery window for the mast, and right now it's scheduled for 2/14 with the install of 2/15. So that's excellent news. That'll be hopefully coming in next week. Install that allow us to finish up that pirate ship. So that'll really start to come together there. Let me skip over here. Riverside Park. So where we are this month with the update, we're steadily progressing through the design. It's proceeding as planned. One of the things we've been talking about is the best way to approach the regulators, because the last time they met, they had certain questions. We don't want to go back to them without those questions being answered. To answer those questions, we must then complete the 60% design. So that's kind of where we stand. I know there were some questions about the physical model. So once they create the design, and right now they've got the 2D set, that's working well. It's the 3D that they're working on now, specifically with the different fish species in terms of velocity, roughness, coefficient. There's a lot of different design aspects, and they are looking at each individual fish category and making sure that there's good passage. So it's a lot of good discussion going on with that. Going to the physical model. So once that design is done, you'll hear the word surface. The surface is created. It's a computer generated image that will be sent over to the folks in Prague. They need about 4 months or so to, once we finish, to when we can go over there and do it. So we're looking at a July, August for the physical model, and the testing, the live test that they're gonna have happen. Riverside Park and the Wave, kind of similar. They're both connected. I kind of talked about bullet 1. We're having to go get additional survey for the Clomer, so they're proceeding on that, and as well as the surveyors were doing some investigation of the land ownership on the other side of the river. One of the things that I need to touch base with, again, we've been playing phone tag, is get a meeting set up with the attorney for MSD. He's Billy Clark's very knowledgeable about Norfolk Southern as well as the railroads. I think that'll help with the easement acquisition there. So we're just laying the groundwork, trying to get some information so that we can move into the, not acquisition, but easements. That's kind of a little bit of update on Riverside and the Wave. We go into Greenway. We did get, Tim mentioned to us that the Beaver Dam Creek portion, we were trying to speed that up to just bundle it in with the 251 Greenway, but DOT informed him that it must go through the RFQ process. So he is proceeding to get that on the street so we can go through that process. So I think they're going to have, those paths may not end up becoming parallel. We'll see, but at least we have the information and we're progressing forward. Funding strategies. Part of this is new to me, but one of those conversations that I mentioned earlier, the meetings that we've got set up is and Eric, if you want to jump in and talk too, since you're here, I didn't want to put you on the spot. But you might be a better can fill us in.
Sure. I think part of the dilemma is talking about costs in isolation without talking about sources of funding, potential sources of funding, knowing that now there's a lot of available funding coming down from the federal level that may factor into what we're doing here locally, as well as institutional grantors in our region. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with identifying who those are within this and in this public forum. And so we'll simply say potential funder A had a preliminary discovery meeting with them yesterday, and we being Riverlink, so Lisa Raleigh, Mark Hunt, who'd made the contact with potential donor A, and myself, just to introduce and describe the project in its entirety, and then to just ask for potential strategies, how we might navigate that particular funding source, and had some very constructive discussion with that director there. And so optimistic, and remain optimistic. We are fully funded through design, so that we don't have anything that we've bought that we can't pay for. At the decision point for actual construction, that's when we have to say what we're doing. Are we proceeding? Are we scaling back or whatever? That can be done beforehand, the scaling back or whatever the value engineering. But I guess all to say, there's no anxiety about where we are now and the boats that are in the water, so to speak, no pun intended. So we have the design fully funded. These are significant potential funding sources. Potential funder B, we also are having discussions with that particular funder and looking at what is possible, rather than going in modestly with some of these. We might go in a little more aggressively, and we're definitely being encouraged to do that. None of this is a sure thing, and we all understand that too. All to say, the funding has been back burner until we got more cost estimates and design elements nailed down. Now funding is beginning to come together too, and the strategy around that. I think when we meet on the 22nd, I believe is the meeting that that we've scheduled to bring together a joint meeting of the Board of Commissioners, their subcommittee, this particular group or subcommittee of this group, to talk about primarily the cost estimates. I think that was the intent, but it did seem to be a little bit much in a vacuum or absent the funding strategy that may accompany that. That may lead to different decisions than would be reached if we also had some discussion around funding strategy. So that's why that was, in talking with Luke, we thought that was the best way to go about that. And that's why we have that composition meeting week after next, 2 weeks from yesterday, I believe, is the date. So I can answer questions generally, and I'm happy to share, like, one-on-one with you what we've learned. So that's where that is. We're putting action to it now, I guess, is the big message. Whereas before it was all speculative and sort of forming a plan and not knowing exactly what the target was. We're getting more clarity on the target now, and then that helps inform the funding strategy. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Eric.
Questions? Okay, anybody have any sort of off agenda comments to make? Because we're at the end. If not, I'd like a motion to adjourn. Anybody speak right
I'll
out?
make that motion.
Okay, thank you,
This
Lucy.
is Lucy.
All right,
And I'll
so
second, Gerald.
we stand adjourned. Thank you all. See you next month.
See you. Thank you.
Thank you.